Hey up and welcome to another episode of Last Cast. You join us today back on the banks of the River Ouse in what is a familiar peg to us actually, one that we fished before. If you check out our previous video called a mixed bag, this is the exact same peg that we're on. We thought we'd come down here today and sort of look at the peg now it's turned autumn, so sort of give ourselves a bit of a contrast between how it fishes in autumn and how it fishes in summer. In terms of the actual peg that's in front of us, you can see it's nice open expansive water. It's lower than it was on our previous visit and it's running very clear, so the river is actually quite low at the moment. So with that in mind, and bear in mind the temperatures are dropping as we're at the back end of October now, we're going to have to approach the peg more carefully, more refined baits, less feed, things like that. It's sort of a prelude to it going into winter really. So in terms of the ground bait that we've got next to us, we'll put some footage in that we filmed last night because we were actually on the banks of the Ouse doing a bit of fishing, and we thought we'd prep the ground bait then. The reason for that is it makes the ground bait really inert, really sticky, and gives it plenty of time to take on all the water. So it will get down to the bottom in this deep section of river that we've got in front of us here today, which has plumbed up about 15 to 16 foot. So in terms of that ground bait mix that we've got there, as you can see, I brought it down today and I've riddled it off this morning just so it's fresh again, get some air into the mix. But you can see just how quickly that binds. So it's a very heavy mix, plenty of water in there, and even some oil from the hemp seed as well, just to make sure it does get to the bottom in this depth of water. And especially making it more inert means that it's going to draw less attention from the bleak basically, which were a problem when we came down here in summer. So that's why I've gone for that ground bait mix. In terms of the actual contents of the mix, we've got one bag of Silver X Roach from Dynamite Baits, a nice mix, plenty of hemp seed, plenty of attractants in it, but not a great deal of feed content. Again, the reason being, I don't think the fish are going to really feed aggressively today, so the less feed content I can have in the mix, the more bites I should get. In terms of the other components of the mix, we've got a bag of Dynamite Baits, frenzied hemp seed in there as well. Again, going on the principle of attraction for that one, there's plenty of hemp seed, plenty of scent and things like that. It's a very dark mix, so it will sit nicely on the bottom here. You can see the bottom's quite clear, it's fairly silty. Sort of as you can see from the banking around us, it's like a muddy kind of colour, and obviously you need to have a ground bait mix that's darker than the riverbed that you're fishing on. Again, there's plenty of predators in the River Ouse, and they won't sit over a light mix for very long, so that's why you've got a dark mix. The only other component to that is again a full bag of Sensor's 3000 River in the black mix. Again, dark mix, but the key thing is with that, it's very heavy. That's why this mix has got great binding properties, as you can see. Obviously the hemp seed doesn't really have much binding with it, so you need to introduce a bag like that. There's a bit more feed content in the river, but the key thing is that it's going to make the mix get down to the bottom and sit there, just making sure all the ground bait and all the particles that I do introduce into the ground bait get down there intact. So as you can see, that's the mix we're going to use today. Really nice mix, riddled it off, so it's just nice and fluffy now in the morning, perfect to use. In terms of the lines that I'm going to fish today, I'm going to fish two lines. I'm going to fish an inside worm line, just in case I think there's plenty of perch down there. I think the conditions are near perfect for perch fishing today. It's overcast, the river's very clear, so I think the perch should have a good feed. And obviously there's always a chance in these rivers of hooking a 2-pound fish, so if we're looking to boost our weight, that's the way to go for it. But the main plan of attack is going to be at 13 metres over the ground bait. The key thing is with your ground bait line is you need to plumb up slightly downstream of yourself, never straight in front. You want to plumb up in front just to get an idea, but the key thing is you're fishing slightly downstream. The faster the flow is, the further downstream you need to be fishing to make sure your rig gets a chance to settle. So we'll run through how we fish the rigs in terms of when we're into the session basically. But mentioning rigs, we'll have a look at them now. As you can see, I've got 4 top 5 set up in front of me. 3 of those are for fishing over the ground bait line and one's my worm line. The thing is with your ground bait line, the key thing is you've got to think about it in terms of stick float fishing. In stick float fishing, it's very easy to move that float up the line, overshot the float a bit and really control the float through the peg. Pole fishing, you need to have different rigs to apply those different principles from stick float fishing. So the first rig that I've actually got set up, which I think will come into its own today if I think there's a few bream or bonus fish down there, is actually a flat float. So we'll quickly ship up the rig now. As you can see, we've got plenty of depth in front of us. The float there is a 4-gram Sensor's Bogdan. It's a full-on flat float design, so this is where I'm going to be holding the bait absolutely stationary. Flat float fishing is a bit of a new thing to me. I've probably done it once or twice, so I'm still learning, to be honest, and I'm just trying to gauge how to go about it, but we're going to give this a go today if I feel there's a few better fish in the peg. That's on 013 Guru N gauge, and we've got a double 5 elastic in there. The reason for that is we're going for bigger fish. You need a strong elastic to set the hook in deep water. And equally, if there's a few big bream, skimmers, chub, whatever it might be, they're really going to pull back. There is quite a bit of flow today. And obviously deep water, you need a powerful elastic to make sure you can control those fish. If I was fishing, say, single 5, I'd have no chance of actually getting the fish out. They'd be straight off downstream and we'd have a nightmare with it. So moving down the rig, I've got this set about 1.5 foot over depth. So the key thing is from the bottom of the rig, we've got a size 18 Trundling wide gate match on there, barbed pattern, again deep water. The fish are going to thrash around quite a bit, and you need a barb to make sure that hook stays in. 6-inch hook length, and because we've got it set over depth, we've got pairs of number 8 droppers there, and we're going to have the bottom, probably 2 of those. I might move that one up a bit on the bottom, and it's basically a trial and error thing of using these to anchor the bait down. So some days you might get away with just having 2 number 8s on the bottom, some days you might need all 6 like that, and then again you just have to use your shotting beneath the olivette just to make sure that that bait's stationary. So again, it's something that I'm going to have to learn as I go on today, but hopefully we can get a few bites on it. So as you can see there, I've got an olivette and a few shot beneath it just to lock it, and I have the olivettes on all my rigs, as you'll see, sliding. I just give them about a couple of inches of movement, and I think that just stops the hook bouncing out on fish when I'm playing them. It's just something, personal preference. It's not something you have to do, but it's just something that gives me a bit more confidence when I'm playing fish. The next rigs are all pretty traditional. I've got 2 here set up. Won't pick that one up because it's identical apart from the weight of the float. We'll shift this rig up to the top again. These are my running rigs. These are what I'll actually use to run down the peg. This one's heavier than that one. Obviously this one's I'm going to hold back a bit, so I'm going to fish this 6 inches over depth and just sort of creep the bait through. My other rig that I've got set up in a 2 gram of exactly the same float pattern is just a running rig that's going to go straight through the peg at whatever pace the river's going. So again, offering myself different forms of presentation, and that will make all the difference in terms of what we can catch. This we've got double 4 elastic as with the other one. Again, heavy, fairly heavy elastic, but nice and soft on the strike. So plenty powerful enough to control whatever we're going to hook. But the key thing is that on the strike I'll be able to set the hook because the elastic powers up quite quickly. So you can see again plenty of line above the float. We've got probably about 3.5–4 foot there. And again, because this rig's going to be running down the peg, you need to give yourself a bit of line to allow that float to move side to side as it's working down the river. Again, one thing you'll see us doing, which we'll run through when we're actually in the session, is following the pole down. So starting with a bit of pole behind you so you can ship out as the float's going down the peg. The float choice is a Sensor Jean-Francois. It's a classic pattern with a wire stem, fairly thick hollow bristle, but not too thick. Again, it's something that I'll be able to see against the dappled lighting, but it'll register with the droppers, which is very important. That's on our 11 Guru N gauge. And we'll move down the line here to an olivette, which I've got set 2.5–3 foot above the hook length. As you can see, sliding again, some number 9s beneath it, one to kick it away. The reason why we have that shot there just away from the bulk is just so it kicks the line away as you're laying the rig in, just to make sure the line can't tangle over the top of the olivette. Then we've got 4 number 9 droppers. I'm looking to fish this through the bottom, say 2.5 foot of the water. But again, if bleak become a problem, you can see I've got plenty of number 9s there. I can bring those all into play and really get that bait down to the bottom quicker should I need to. Again, the key thing with the number 9s is you need droppers that they contrast, or they complement, sorry, the thickness of the bristle that you use in your float, so they do register when they're falling through the water and when you get a bite. There's no point having number 11s with a thick bristle because you'll never see the bites. So number 9s, fish dislodges that, we'll see nice positive bites. Again, also with the bleak in the peg, heavy droppers mean that bait's going to get down faster. The hook length on this, because of the clear water, we've got 10-inch hook length, and that's a 0.095 Dren and Suplex fluorocarbon down on this case to an 16 B560. Again, barb pattern. Don't think there's really any better hooks for natural water roach fishing like this. Nice and light, but nice and strong, and just complement the baits that I'm using in terms of casters, maggots, and things like that. You can use pretty much anything on that that nice crystal bend of the hook. So as I say, 10-inch hook length because I'll be able to get the bait down, but equally it's going to act more naturally than a 6-inch hook length. And again, I can always bring those number 9s down to stop the bleak being a problem. I say the other rig for that line is exactly the same, but in a 2 gram, and I've got that set just off bottom, about 1 inch off. And as I say, that's going to be run straight through the peg over the ground bait at whatever pace. I think that can often be a very good way of catching the smaller roach or the bulk of the fish. With the two slower rigs, you're looking to catch a better stamp really. So that's the 13 metre line with the ground bait looked at. So now we're just going to have a look at the worm rig. So this is the worm rig that we're going to use. As I say, this is down my peg about 11.5 metres, just on that near side slope where I think the perch should sit. In terms of what we've got downstream of me, feature-wise, there's a nice big tree, there's some metal scaffolding in the edge here, and there's plenty of features, but it's far too far out of the way for me to fish effectively in terms of how far down the peg it is, so I'd be at a very aggressive angle on my seat box, and equally I'd have trouble getting fish out of there. They'll go straight into the snag. So what I'm looking to do is fish away from it, but in an area I think I can draw the fish out by feeding. So it's down my peg a bit, say 11.5 metres, so probably about 10 or so from the bank. As you can see there, we've still got plenty of depth, but it's still about 3 foot shallower than our other rigs at 13 metres. So in terms of what we've got here, rig-wise, everything's stepped up. So the elastic choice is double 6. Again, going on the principle of stopping power with this elastic, the key thing is that it powers up very quickly, and I've got this set fairly tight, so in case I do need to put some pressure on a fish like a chub or whatever it might be, I can definitely pull it away from the snags and things if it does even decide to go on towards the near bank. Again, I'll have some pull behind me, so if I do need to try and drag the fish out to mid-river, I can actually pull it out away from the bank rather than towards me. So again, it's just a case of making sure that I can get these fish out. The main line's 013 Guru N gauge, and that comes down to a Sensor's Danube float. This is a line through body design, so if I need to set these thicker hooks, I'm going to be on a size 14, I can really strike into the fish without worrying about snapping the eye out or damaging the line. So again, it's just a lot more direct to the fish. You can see there, really nice thick bristle and a nice bulbous body. Again, for worm and big baits, it's important. The other thing is I'm looking to stop the bait still in this section of the river, maybe just inch it down at a tiny pace, but I'm looking to have it pretty much stationary on the bottom. So that's the key thing with this. In terms of using a flat float there, it'd be very difficult because, as I say, I'm fishing down the peg, so it's hard to see how that flat float would be sitting. So that's the choice there. In my box as well, safe, I think this isn't presenting the rig quite well. I've got 4 grams and 2 grams in the same pattern in my box, so I've always got the option to switch to those. Again, thick wire stems, nice and stable, and also helps when I'm pulling the float back upstream. You can see we've got an Olivet sliding again, and number 8s as droppers this time. Again, 4 number 8s, just down from there, spaced out again, down the line. So I've got a steady fall, so say for perch, they will watch that bait fall into the peg, and obviously they'll snatch it very often as it's lifting and dropping. So that's why we've gone for that. It's not really worth, again, if I was fishing in a flat float there, that just bombs the bait straight to the bottom, whereas this I can lift and drop and work the bait down the peg to try and entice bites. Again, the droppers, number 8s, again complementing that thick bristle, so get nice positive bites. And in this actual instance I've gone for a 6-inch hook length. Again, because I'm going to be fishing on the bottom, I'll probably have this number 8 just around bottom, if not laying on by an inch or two. Again, because we're on a slope, we're not quite sure how that's going to sit, but that's the key thing. So I've got that length of line will be on the bottom, but should a fish pick that up, it'll immediately dislodge this number 8 and very soon the one above it, so I'll see the bites nice and quickly. So 6 inches of 011 N gauge, and I'm actually starting on a size 20 wide gate match. As soon as I start encountering perch, then I'll put on a size 14 to fish worm. But what I want to find out is what fish are going to feed over the chop worm and cast that I'm going to feed there. If it turns out there's roach and dace, then I'll catch them on this rig. But if it turns out I start getting into a few perch, then immediately I'll switch to a 14 and use sections of worm, because that's really what I'm looking for on that line, is bonus fish. So talking about baits there, behind us we've got plenty of dendrobinas, and I'm going to be chopping those up nice and fine to fish on that line, on the close section, just down the peg. I've got some casters that I'm going to feed there as well. That's going to be my main bait, and I may fish maggot or something like that, small sections of worm over the top of it. I've got plenty of hemp seed with me, got some Dynamite Baits frenzied hemp seed that I'm going to put in quantities if it turns out the roach do turn up on that 13 metre line, and that's going to be going out into the ground bait. Then for the hook, just dead simple red maggots. These are going to be my starting bait and my go-to bait if I'm struggling to get bites. So looking at the ground bait, I'm going to go about feeding the peg to start with. What I've got next to me, as I say, is my ground bait, mixed up the night before. And what I'm going to do is put in to a separate bucket what I'm going to actually feed initially. So what I'll do there is I'll put in 6 double handfuls of ground bait neat, just as it is, and that's going to make up my 6 initial balls that I'm going to feed. The thing is with this is that I'm going to put in a quantity of ground bait at the start, so I want to measure the quantities that I'm feeding. So I know that I'll put 6 balls in, and what I'm going to do is to that I'm going to add the measurements of particle baits. So I'm going to use a 250ml pole cup. So to that 6 balls of ground bait, I'm going to put in 250ml of hemp, and I'm also going to put in 250ml of chopworm and castor, mainly castor though in that. So that'll be a full pint of particles that are going to go into the peg initially in 6 balls of ground bait. So I know for future reference, say I think I've overfed it, then I can half that. I'll just go from that and use it as a reference point. The reason why I also keep the rest of the ground bait neat is just in case it is difficult. Rather than, say, a lot of anglers, you'll see them get the ground bait and chuck in just an arbitrary amount of particles, hemp, casters, whatever, to their mix, and that's it, that's them done for the day. The reason why I've done that is I want to be able to regulate my feed through the day. In summer it's not so important to do so. You want to get as much bait in as you can, especially on a river like the Ouse where there's plenty of fish. But the reason why I've left it as it is so I can even feed to neat balls of ground bait. If I think the fish are dropping down my peg, but there's not many there, I can feed just ground bait, just as an attractant to draw the fish back up and not put any feed in it whatsoever. So I give myself lots of options, and I can work through the feeding through the day as the session goes on, basically. So I'm giving myself plenty of flexibility in my approach to the peg. So as I say, that's all looked at now. So what I'm going to do is make up those balls of ground bait, get them cupped in, put in a couple of bait droppers of chopworm and castor on that short line, and then start at the peg and see what we can catch. Right, so I'm just finishing off the cupping in process here. As you can see, because of the banking behind me, it's a bit difficult, so I'm having to stand up when I'm shipping out. But the key thing is where I'm cupping in. Obviously the banking does slope away from us a little bit the further out we get. In terms of where I'm actually looking to present the rig, it's not entirely flat, but it does slope away progressively. So in terms of my marker on my pole that I've got, it's quite useful on this pole how it's got actual hand markers, so it's numbered up the section, but you can always use a piece of tape as your reference. Is I'm cupping in, I've plumbed up at where the little mark is, saying a number 5, and what I'm doing there, that's where I'm going to fish. But because there's a slight gradient, I'm looking to cup in just shy of that. As you can see also where I'm cupping in, it's slightly downstream. I've got a far bank marker, which is that hacked down tree there, and that's where I'm just potting my ground bait in. The reason why I'm cupping in today rather than balling in is twofold. Firstly, because we don't have a quantity of bait to put in as we would in summer. Maybe in summer I might put in 10, even more balls of ground bait if I think there's a lot of fish in front of me. Whereas now I'm looking to just introduce a small quantity, 6 balls of ground bait, and just see how those fish. The other thing being as well the fact that it's deep. So in terms of the depth, that's going to cause the bait to spin off in various different angles. So in terms of trying to achieve a decent grouping of the bait there, that's why I've cupped in rather than balling it in, because I think balling it in will increase the spread a bit too much, and when there's less fish feeding in your peg and less competition, you need to have your bait cupped in nice and tight and a decent level of grouping so you can run your rig over the top. So as I say, that's the peg fed. What I'm going to do actually as well is feed my worm line, and the reason why I'm doing this at the start as well is because I think I need to get the fish there but not over a quantity of bait, so it gives me somewhere to start rather than just going straight over that 13-metre line. In terms of what I do, as I say, I won't actually show what I'm doing because it's a bit fiddly, but I clip on my bait dropper. As you can see, I just use a small one, less strain on the pole that way. I've got a little snap link swivel there, and all I do is use the rig that I'm fishing with and just clip it onto the loop in the end of the line there. The other thing that's important is when you're shipping out, put a cable tie just over the end section there. Make sure it's over the reinforced section where it's strongest, where the other section will be going in, because it's going to take some level of strain, and don't over tighten the cable tie. The reason why I do this is because the banking here is quite shallow on the near side, and when I'm shipping out on a long line like this, I need to make sure that bait dropper's not emptying its contents just at my feet. I need to make sure it gets to the distance. So in a similar way to when you say fishing the pole feeder, you use a cable tie, just hook the bait dropper over the top of that and make sure that you get into your mark, and then you can deposit the bait dropper there. So as I say, I'll get that done now, and then we'll get fishing and hopefully start to get into a run of fish and put a few in the net. Right, so I'm now going to go for the first cast of the day. Just going to slip on a single red maggot onto the hook, and I'll quickly run through how I'm going to go about shipping this out and getting the rig in the water, which is a very important part of fishing the pole on the river. So ship out now to just shy of 13 metres, I want to leave some pull behind me so I'm allowed, so I can follow the float down the peg. Gives me a bit more chance to run the float through. So I'll just hold the rig out the water and I'll show you how I'll lay this in. When I'm actually fishing, I'll do this a lot quicker. What I'm doing is looking to get the rig in upstream. The key thing is you want your bait to be fishing by the time it gets over the top of the ground bait. So what I'm doing is getting that maggot in, then lowering the olivette in and bringing the float slightly downstream of where the olivette's gone in. You'll see the stem of the float line up with the olivette, and that means that's directly below the float. Then the droppers are going to take effect, and now the bait's fishing directly over my ground bait. And hopefully we'll start to get a few indications quite quickly. So you can see there just how I've gone about laying the rig in. If you lay your olivette downstream, got a bite in a fish straight away. If you lay your rig in downstream, then your hook bait will never actually be presented by the time it reaches the ground bait. It's a nice stamp brooch, that. Great fish for the first one of the session. You can see a couple of ounces, mint condition, gorgeous fish. As I was saying, so you want to make sure your olivette's settled beneath your float by the time you allow the float to start running through. So that's why we're getting the olivette slightly upstream of the float before we drop the float in. By watching that stem underneath the float, you can tell where your olivette is in relation to it. So that's how you get your float fishing correctly. So we've started on the rig that I'm running through the peg on maggot, size 18 hook, and straight away we're into good fish, so it won't be long hopefully before I'm looking to start to move through the rigs, use heavier rigs, and look to get onto the caster or even sections of worm. And again, I've always got my backup line of that worm line down there. It's exactly the same process again. Getting out to just shy of 13 metres, allowing the hook bait to go in, watching the stem of my float, lining it up, and then the olivette's settled and the bait's now fishing correctly. You can see there's those number 9s, nice heavy droppers start to register on the bristle, and all I'll do is just check that float progressively down the swim, just making sure that the rig's fishing nicely. But I'm just letting this go at the pace of the river. As you can see, I've set my box square onto where I'm fishing. There's a bite there again, another fish. Not a big one. To allow me to move the pole across my legs and follow the float down. You don't want to have your box pointing downstream. It's a smaller fish this time, because that's going to limit your ability to follow that float down. So you want to pretty much catch fish or be fishing just shy of just in front of yourself and downstream slightly. Pop the hook out there. And as I say, that means that you've got plenty of room to strike, play fish and ship back as well. And that's a very important consideration when you are fishing like this, is how you actually set your stall out to catch fish efficiently. Especially as you can see today, we've got awkward banking behind us, as you will on most rivers. So you need to make sure that you've got plenty of space to ship back, have all your kit set and everything like that, to keep yourself catching fish at a decent rate of knots. As you can see, the stamper fish so far are quite small, so it's a bite every single run through, but it's important that we can make as much time to fish as we can. Drop that float in by having our kit set around us, so we're able to ship back and keep the process efficient to try and build a nice weight. So obviously in a match, that kind of thing is absolutely important, absolutely crucial when you are fishing, to try and build a weight. So we're just on a pleasure session today to see what we can catch. So it's not crucial, but again, it's just the factors of comfort and efficiency when you are fishing. So you can see now I'm just following that float downstream. So I've got plenty of pull behind me to do that. And that just keeps the float going in a nice straight line, rather than it swinging back in towards you, where you're going to have issues with snagging up and the depth changing. Not had a bite that time, which I'm not too worried about, so I'm just going to lift the float clear of the water and then set it back fishing again. Again, you can't just drag your float back upstream and let it go again, because obviously your olivette's then going to be downstream and you're not going to be fishing effectively. So it's important that you do lift that float right out the water, take it back upstream and start the process again. Just had a bite there and missed it. I'm just going to check the bait now, because obviously when you're getting bleak and roach and dace in your peg, they can quite quickly bust the maggot. Which they have in this case. So as I say, I might well step up to, I think I'll try double maggot on this run through, just to see if there's a better fish down there. But again, it's early doors and I'd expect the size of fish to increase as the session goes on. And especially if there's roach like that in the peg, I'll look to introduce even more casters and probably even bulk the ground bait out with a bit more hemp. I've got another tin with me today as well, just in case it turns out there's plenty of fish down there and I don't actually have to use the ground bait so much as an attractant to draw the fish in, but I can actually feed them and use the ground bait just as a carrier. It's definitely fishing a lot better than I expected it to today so far. So again, presenting that rig nicely. And instantly what I've identified is there's fish feeding directly over the ground bait, and I'm also getting bites further downstream. So the fish haven't shoaled up just yet over the ground bait. So it might take a short while, there's another bite and another fish, for them to actually move in right over the top of the ground bait. And that's when you can do a really good weight, when you're catching fish really consistently. It's a much better roach this time. Straight away again, switch to double maggot, and we've instantly upped the stamp of fish. So hopefully if we go to the caster, we might start getting a few fish this size and hopefully above as well. That's a lovely fish to catch. Again, compared to the stamp of fish that we were catching, fishing rod and line on this peg, that's a lot bigger. And again, this is still on the lightest rig and sort of the most gentle form of presentation that I've got set up with me today. So hopefully when we start going through those rigs, moving on to casters and things like that, we'll get into a few bigger fish and start to really put weight together. Right, so I've had a good start there, fishing the light rig, caught plenty of fish in the first sort of 30 minutes or so. Clearly there's plenty of fish down there, so it won't be long before I look to top up that line, but before I do, what I'm going to do is just have a quick look on that worm line that I fed at the start of the session. So I've only got a size 20 hook on here, and I'm just going to put on double maggot and just see what's down there. If I hook a perch straight away or within the first couple of chucks, then I'll look to switch that up to a size 14 and just fish worm there and look for bonus fish. So just going to swing that out now, just make sure the elastic is set right. And then get this shipped out just downstream myself on the end of my 11.5 metre section. Contrast with this is I'm actually swinging this rig just slightly downstream myself. In terms of the weight of the rig that I'm using for the depth, it's quite heavy. So obviously that allows me to swing that towards the near shelf. And equally, because I'm fishing downstream, it is important that I do try and gain some control of that rig and make sure it's laying up against the shelf as well. So again, same process, just following that downstream. We had an indication straight away there. So again, just drawing that float upstream and laying it back in. Just had a bite there straight away, which is telling me that there's probably a few small fish down there on the maggots. So I'll have another quick go on that line and just see what they are. Yeah, the maggots are actually untouched, so it could be small perch. I'll just ship that out again. I'm just going to pop the 13 metre section off because it is a bit awkward in terms of the banking behind me. And again, just giving that float a chance, in a contrast, as I say, to the ground bait, letting the Olivet go just slightly ahead of the rig, or the float I should say, and then making sure that it can swing towards me. The other thing is I've got this rig set about 10 inches over depth as well, just to make sure that I've got a fairly stationary hook bait. And you'll see I'm just gently working that down the peg. Again, just looking to pick off one or two bonus fish here. Again, just drawing that rig upstream. Getting it back into fish again. So what I'm trying to achieve with this rig is getting that hook bait to just trundle along the bottom. So it's just a case of working this rig out as I go through the session, making sure that I can get that bait just to trundle along the bottom, just slower than the pace of the current, or as slow as I can get it. So biting a fish straight away. Not a big fish, but again a good start on this line, so it's telling me that there are fish down there. So it's quite a big bleak, that. So I definitely think that it'll be time very soon to have a go on the worm there. Because if those fish are down there, then they're going to make fishing the maggot a nightmare. But I'll just have one more chuck on this with the double maggots. And then my plan of attack then is to switch over to a size 14 on this. Probably potting another, putting another bait dropper of chopped worm and caster on that line. And then go on to the 3 gram rig over the ground bait while that settles. Again, just trying to optimise my catch rate, because there's definitely quite a few fish in front of me. But the other thing as well, using maggot like this, it does tell you whether your rig's fishing effectively. And obviously it gives you a chance to run that hook bait through to see if there's any other snags that you didn't quite find with the plummet. Because obviously rivers are a bit more difficult than still water, so you've got to try and suss out the peg a little bit. Work out how your rigs are fishing, what the bottom's like and what fish are down there. So using maggot and things like that, it'll give you indications that there's fish down there quite quickly. And that'll tell you whether your rig's fishing properly. So again, just following that downstream a little bit. I'm actually not shipping the pole out any further, because I want to make sure that that bait's just resting on that near side shelf. Because that's how I've planned out how I want to fish this line. Again, when you're looking for bonus fish, you are often looking to fish the bait near as static as you can get. Which is why I've opted for this approach on this line. No bites. Oh, just had a little bit of an indication there. But that's just fishing down to the bottom end of that run. So I'm just going to bring the float back up again, let it settle. As I say, I'm just trying to gauge what's in my peg at this early stage in the session. Another little indication there. Definitely think it's a line that I'll have to move on to the worm a lot sooner. So I'll have one more run through and then I'll get on that 3 gram rig and have a look over that ground bait and see if I can pick up a slightly bigger fish. One thing that I have also seen that I'll point out down to my right hand side, right under this near side banking, is some fry scattering earlier, and they've just done it again as well. She's telling me that there's 1 or 2 perch down there. So what I've actually set up is just a top kit, as you might be able to see in the background there, which is basically a standard commercial rig, nice and strong in case there is a big perch down there. So I might just have a quick look now. As you can see on this rig, the maggots have been bust. There's definitely plenty of fish down there. So on that bonus fish line, it's just a case of sorting out the bigger fish there. So I'm just going to pop that rig to the side and pick up my 3 gram rig. Let's say I've got this set about 6 inches over depth, and I'm actually going to start on this with double maggot just to see what's down there and just see if the actual form of presentation gets better fish rather than the actual bait. So it gives me then a good comparison between this rig and how the 2 gram rig was fishing. So again, sections together and ship out. Just add my 13 metre section that I took off. Then exactly the same process as I said earlier of lowering the rig in and making sure that's beneath the float when I let it settle. And what I'm doing with this rig is I'm actually holding it back. You can see probably on one of the other camera shots that I've got a tight line between the pole float and my pole tip. With this rig I might overshot it. There's a bite straight away, just to allow me to hold it back even more. And as I say, in a similar fashion to what I've got on that worm line, I'm looking to just trundle this bait through on the bottom. So as I'm checking that line, as the float's running down the peg, that hook bait's going to be lifting and dropping on and working its way along the bottom. And because you're presenting it slower, it gives bigger fish more of a chance to have a go at it. So again, just following it down the peg. And looking at how that rig's fishing, I might well add another number 9, just to allow me to hold it back a little bit more and get it dimpled down as well. Oh, we've actually got a fish on right at the bottom end of that run through there, just as I was holding the bait back before I shipped back in. Again, not a big fish, nice little roach, but these are decent weight builders on this natural river. So as I say, I'll get another number 9 on, and hopefully we'll start to suss out the peg quite quickly and start to get into a few better fish as the session progresses. Right, so I've just slipped on a caster again. I've gone back to using this 2 gram rig and fishing casters on it. It seems to be the best method by far at the moment. I've had a few fish on the 3 gram rig to both maggot and caster, but this is producing the bites most consistently. And equally, I've had a decent run of some nice 3-ounce roach, 3 or 4 ounce fish, definitely. But what's happening is I've realised that the fish seem to be moving down the peg away from the ground bait again after that top up. They seem to have, I'm getting bites a lot more downstream, say probably another 4 or 5 foot downstream of the ground bait, which is telling me that those fish have eaten it and are starting to back away. So what I'm thinking now is I'm thinking after a couple of runs through to make sure that those fish are definitely backing away, that it's worth me topping up another ball of ground bait. What worked out so far is the fish are definitely wanting to feed, so as things currently stand, I'm going to put all my focus into this line. I've had a quick go on the flat float as well, but that's not produced any bites, and certainly nowhere near as consistent as this 2 gram rig. As you can see, that caster's run through, and I've had a bite right down away from the ground bait, so those fish are definitely dropping down. That was good, probably 10 or 15 feet down the peg away from the ground bait area. And the key thing is when you're fishing on rivers like this, you need to be quick to make these decisions and realise that the fish are dropping down your peg and it's time to top up. Obviously the flow's going to dislodge the bait and move that down the peg as well, so you need to give the fish a reason to stay in front of you all day. Just pop the hook out of him. Nice little roach, but again, a smaller stamp of fish than we were catching right after topping up. So straight away what I'm going to do is put that rig down. If I can just get the hook out. And pick up my cupping kit. What I've done as well with the ground bait, as you can see now, for the ball that I will be cupping in, I've put plenty of caster in the mix and plenty of hemp as well, because I've realised that the fish are definitely feeding. And what I'm going to look to do is feed a nice firm ball of ground bait that size, as you can see, loaded with casters and hemp. So as I say, there's plenty of fish out there and they're having a feed, so there's no point just feeding neat ground bait. It's time to really give them a bit of feed and try and give them more of a reason to stay in the peg, and hopefully also by feeding more try and draw in some bonus fish. So I'll just quickly wipe my hands and get the cupping kit. But as I say, this is one of the most important things when you are fishing rivers, is topping up, knowing when to top up and how much the fish want to feed, and the only way to judge that is on the day, just going by bites, and as I say, looking for fish dropping down the peg and if bites are drying up. I'm going to have to stand up here obviously because the banking is quite awkward behind us, just to allow me to ship out. So again, getting to that marker on the far bank and the distance marker on my pole. I'm just potting in the ground bait there. As you can see, that's gone in. What I've also noticed is how far down I'm getting the bites. It's probably about 3 feet below my where I've cupped in that the ground bait's settling and starting to break up. Again, worth noting for future sessions is that, because you know if you need to make your ground bait more tacky or whatever it might be to make sure it's getting to the bottom. If I was getting bites a lot further downstream, then it'd tell me that my ground bait was too dry. If I'm getting bites directly where it's cupped in, then I know that it's been, or just slightly downstream, then I know it's nice and sticky and it's getting to the bottom intact and presenting itself correctly. So what I'm going to do is just leave that to settle for a short while, just have a quick look around my other lines. As I say, I've picked off 1 or 2 fish on my worm line, only small, but again, just a case of rotating the swims for about 5 or 10 minutes while that ball's breaking up. I noticed again after my previous top up that the fish didn't actually turn up for the first 5-10 minutes, so I want to let those fish settle. Again, in summer I'd be expecting them to be on that ground bait immediately. This time of year they're not, they're just kind of picking off the odd bit and then they're starting to settle as they build their confidence. Again, I think that's a factor to do with the clear water. So I'm just going to pick up the worm line and probably spend 10 minutes just sort of making a worm twitch around that near side shelf and see if we can pick up 1 or 2 fish on that. Again, if I don't, I'm not too worried. I've let that ground bait line settle, so there should be 1 or 2 fish over the top of that when I do go on it again. So as I say, on this I've stepped up to that size 14 hook already because there were small fish down there. I'm just going to have a look down there on the worm line and see if there's 1 or 2. Let's watch the end of the section. 1 or 2 better fish like perch. We've even seen a chub top not so far away from our pegs, so again, something to think about, that there's definitely a few bonus fish in the area. So as I say, just shipping out, swinging that worm into the area of the peg that I wanted to fish, then lowering the float on top, and then it's just a case of waiting for bites now. So I'll give it 5 or 10 minutes and then have a look over that ground bait line, and hopefully we'll get back into a few of those nice roach on the caster. Right, so we're well into the session now, and things have gone a bit funny actually. I've had a good run of fish after topping up and then topped up again, and the fish just seem to completely disappear. So what I've done is cupped in 2 balls and rested it for half an hour and fed 2 chopped worm lines. I've fed my close line. I've also moved that 11.5 metre line closer to me at a top 6, just a bit further up the shelf because it didn't seem to be producing out there, and as I would wait quite a while for bites. And I'm just trying to cover my options now a little bit and put a few fish in the net. I think what's happened is that pike have moved into the swim with the clear water, because after I fed, I didn't get a run of fish and then the bites dried up as if they'd eaten everything or as if they'd overfed. It was a case of I fed and then there was nothing. Another bite at the end of the swim there. And the fish really do seem to be unsettled. So I don't think we're on for a massive wait today. We've had a few nice fish, some decent quality roach and even a couple of perch as well. But I definitely think with the clear water, the fish have become unsettled when they are shoaling up. I'm thinking that pike have started to move into the peg. There's been 1 or 2 pike at the end of my keep net as well, so clearly they're able to see the prey fish quite happily. And as I say, that's why I think the peg went dead for a while. After going back in, I've had a few more indications though, so the fish might be turning back up again. But as I say, it's just a case of trying to keep bites coming now, so that's why I fed my other lines. So it gives me options to rotate them. Again, this time of year, you're not going to go to a peg and be sat in front of a load of fish and catch all session. You're going to have to work your way around it and try and sort of pick off fish from the peg without unsettling them, as I say, especially when the river's low and clear like it is today. So what I've done is, on my top kit line down the edge, I've put in 3 bait droppers of chopped worm and caster, and on my top 6 line, again just using that same rig that I had earlier, but just about a foot shallower, I've put in another 3 bait droppers there with a few maggots in as well, just to give me a change hook bait. As I say, the light is starting to go a little bit now as well, so if the perch do turn up or a few bonus fish, then I think they will start to feed on these nearer lines. Another small fish on now. Strangely as well, on this long line, the bleak have started to turn up as well, in and amongst the roach. There's one now, tiny stamp fish, not what we're after really in terms of trying to build some decent weight. Just pop the hook out of him. pop them in the keep net. So again, I don't want to go feeding any more bait because I definitely think that what is down there hasn't been eaten. So that's why I've just topped up small amounts every hour or so. But as I say, I don't think we're on for a massive weight today. And as well as that, the best rig still has been this 2 gram rig running the bait through. I think with the clarity of the water, if I slow the rig down too much, it's giving the fish too much time to inspect the rig, and I think that they are being deterred by the sort of unnatural movement of the hook bait. So running the bait through at the full pace of the river or near as seems to be the best way to go. So I think, as I say, conditions are quite difficult. Again, without the bonus fish being there, I've not really felt the need to pick up the flat float. Again, because I don't think there's that many fish there, I want to just try and get a few bites. Just missed one there. And that's another problem that I've been having as well, is I'm getting quite a few missed bites. So I think the fish are definitely becoming a lot more wary of any baits that are going into the peg. Getting a lot of tiny little indications on the float, hitting them with nothing there and the casters coming back intact. So I think the roach are just nipping at the bait and not really taking it down as aggressively as they were earlier in the session, which I think again comes down to the fact that I've been fishing that line quite heavily, and the fact that I think that predators have moved in as well. So I think over the next sort of hour of the session, what I'm going to do is try and rotate the lines and pick off fish until I can find an area where they're happy to settle down. Again, with any luck, we might get into a few bonus fish on the short lines with worm and caster on the hook. But again, we'll just have to see how that goes. Again, tiny little indication there. Striking at it, there's no fish on. Definitely bites from fish though. There's one on now. It does show that the fish are being a lot more wary than they were at the start of the session. But we've had a few of these nice stamp roach on casters. Again, these are the kind of fish that you need to build a weight. But they have been quite hard to come by and very finicky as well. So as I say, we'll keep persevering with this and hopefully we'll get into a few more fish and try and get a steady stream of fish going on at least one of the lines. Oh, there we go. Right, so we've hooked a bed of fish now on that top 6 line. Swimming upstream this one. All I've done there is just switch to a section of worm, and it feels like a perch this. And it is. Not a big fish. Just swing him into the landing net just in case a pike does decide to have a go at him. And the hook's just dropped out in the net, but straight away switch onto that rig while we're letting those balls of ground bait settle that we've just topped up on that 13-metre line. We've got a nice little fish in the net already. So that's quite a good sign, that. I did have another brief look on the top kit line. Again, just a couple of little bites there, but nothing to strike at. So I think the fish are definitely shying away into that slightly deeper water. Right, so it's looking like the session's drawing to a fair close now. Just starting to lose the light a bit, so I'm just going to go and try and catch one last fish to end on, just on the 13-metre line with ground bait. As I say, the session today has been quite difficult. I think definitely with the clarity of the water, the fish have been put off the feed, and I certainly think that pike have been in the swim quite regularly and spooked the shoal. We had a decent start where we got plenty of bite, and then it went quiet. Had to rotate around the lines, things like that, try and pick off a few fish, and then refed, and then a few decent roach turned up, and then, as I say, the peg just absolutely died after that. and again had to go back to rotating the lines, thinking about topping up. And as I say, towards the say the final half of the session, we've caught steadily, just 1 or 2 fish every so often. But again, that's often the case in conditions like this. You've just got to accept that you're not going to catch massive weights. And even now, as I say, just fishing maggot on the ground bait line, and I didn't get a bite that run through. So it just shows that something's definitely putting the fish off. So I can't say today that I've overfed or anything like that. It's very difficult to judge at times, especially when the fish have been so finicky. But when I have fed, the fish have turned up. Bit of an indication there. But then they very quickly disappeared. And then when I've refed again, they've not come back. So I definitely think it's pike that spooked them. And likewise, a similar kind of problem we've had on the shorter lines, where we've had 1 or 2 fish or a few bites, and then it's just absolutely died. And I think again, with the clarity of the water, the fish are spooking very quickly. Just had a bit of an indication then. Again, having to strike every little knock on the float just to try and connect with fish. We've missed quite a lot of bites today. Again, at the start they were taking the casters and the maggots really confidently, and then as the session's worn on, they've become a lot more finicky. We've started to lose a few fish as they've only been lightly hooked. Just going to run that down to the bottom end of the peg. There's a small fish on now. And as I say, it's just been one of those days where we've had to really try and struggle to get bites and work around the peg. It's a tiny little bleak, that one. But again, I've had only a few of these today, but they've been right down the bottom end of the peg, so I think, as I say, we're starting to lose the light now. We'll call that the last fish of the session, and we'll have a look at what we've caught. Right, so that's our final net of fish there, as you can see. A decent net of silverfish, probably 3, 4, maybe 5 pounds tops of good quality silvers. Clearly we've learned from our previous session that we did in summer here. We've caught a decent stamp of roach, a few dace, a few gudgeon and some perch as well. Again, using heavy rigs and bombing the bait down to the bottom. So I certainly think we've had a decent session considering the conditions and the fact there's been pike in the peg as well. I think what we might well do is come back in winter. We've obviously fished it in summer and autumn now, so it'd be nice to get a contrast through the seasons and see what this peg actually fishes like and how it looks in a couple more seasons. So it's certainly something we'll look at in the future. Again, hopefully the things we've covered today will help you in your pole fishing approach to rivers. As I say, we've not caught a massive net of fish today, but the key thing was running through a few techniques and just learning more about the river. So as always from Last Cast, thanks for watching, don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode. In terms of what we're trying to do today, there's no way we'll be able to get them out. So again, this rig is in a, what? Ah, typical. Been going on so long. We'll have to try and cut that in. Someone's got hold of that, hasn't it? We're going to have to cut this in, aren't we? That's on. Got to be. Yep. Yeah. Can I catch some fish today? Is it? That's a big one. It's a lazy one. Do you reckon low double or 8 or 9? Just let it run like that, it's dragging bottom massively. Yep. Little in. I'm giving you a run around.